Hey friends, it's Mike. I have some interesting Billy news to take you through, where William's connection into the Memoirs of Billy Shears is becoming increasingly obvious. The intertwining of Billy's work as Paul McCartney with Memoirs is becoming more and more tightly linked, as I will show you in a moment. Memoirs is classified as historical fiction, but as I have explained in many presentations and interviews, the book is also encoded with the truth. And once you decode Memoirs, the book reveals the truth not only about the replacement of biological Paul McCartney, but the Beatles as well. When the first edition of Memoirs came out in 2009, this was the version with the red cover, it was a bit cryptic and not nearly as straightforward as the second edition, the blue-covered version, which came out in 2018 and contained a plethora of footnotes which were very revealing. And when the second edition of Billy's Back came out, which is the abridged version of Memoirs, but still weighing in at 400 pages, Tom included additional footnotes which revealed even more about the Beatles myth, especially as to the authorship of the music. The updated version of Billy's Back came out after I released my 4.5-hour presentation, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music? The footnotes in the blue-covered version of Billy's Back confirm the conclusion I reached from my research, which is the Beatles did not write all their own music, nor did they play on their records, especially between the period of 1962 through 1966. During this time, the lads' studio work consisted of recording the vocals for the songs only, not the music. And then, starting with Billy's Sgt. Pepper album, we begin to hear more of their own compositions, as well as John, George, and Ringo playing on the recorded tracks, although I believe outside songwriters and studio musicians were still being used through 1969, which would include Abbey Road and Let It Be. To record the instrumental tracks on the early albums, starting with Please Please Me through Revolver, George Martin employed studio musicians. This approach, which I refer to as the Wrecking Crew model, was the process used by the music industry throughout the 1960s and 1970s. The Wrecking Crew would record the music, and then the artist would come in to lay down the vocal tracks. A great example of this is the Beach Boys and their album Pet Sounds. The Beach Boys did not play on that record. They came in to do the vocals after the instrumental tracks were recorded by the studio musicians. You can watch the Wrecking Crew documentary for free on YouTube. For those who have not watched my presentation, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music?, I will leave a link in the description box below. My video, which was released a year ago on April 1st, 2020, and currently has over 130,000 views worldwide, and that number is probably closer to 150,000 when I take into account YouTube stripping out views, which I caught them doing a number of times. This is why I have uploaded the presentation to my other platforms as well. As a side note, the video was running for 6 months with no copyright issues until Universal Music Group, who initially had no problem with me including a portion of Lennon's song God in the presentation, then turned around again after 6 months and decided to submit a copyright claim on the song, which shut the video down worldwide until I was able to replace the track with a copyright-free song, which I did after a few days. I will argue this type of interference doesn't happen unless you venture too close to the truth. Now, the majority of this presentation is going to focus on the combined packaging of Billy's new book titled The Lyrics, which covers the period from 1956 to the present with the Memoirs of Billy Shears. And the website we're going to look at that brings Billy's two worlds together is www.memoirsofpaul.com. And I'm assuming Tom was involved in setting the website up. I do have an email into Tom asking for his input. If he responds after this video is completed, I will include his response in the description box below. But before we get into decoding some of the information on the website, I want to cover a post involving Gregory Paul Martin, who is credited with the foreword in the current edition of Memoirs and who also did the narration for the audio version of the book. The post I'm going to show you goes back around 6 months ago. I was made aware of it soon after Gregory posted, but I decided at the time to wait before discussing it. I was asked back then what I thought was going on, so I'll take the time now to give you my thoughts and opinion. Now, as many of you know, Gregory Paul Martin is the eldest son of George Martin, and he wrote, or at the very least approved the foreword which kicks off the second edition of Memoirs, or the blue-covered version of the book. So let's take a moment to read that forward. When Thomas E. U. Harriot first approached me about narrating this book, I was curious. I had no idea such a strong belief was still prevalent in the Beatles subculture that the rumor about Paul's death all those years ago was true. Exploring the possibility in the form of a novel seemed an intelligent way to address the subject, and the extent of U. Harriot's knowledge of the subject interested me. As a gifted actor, I have a natural facility for mimicry. My version of Paul McCartney's voice came easily to me, especially since I have known him since I was 5 years old. I first met Paul in the winter of 1962, just a few months after my father, Sir George Martin, signed the Beatles to Parlophone Records. To record the memoirs, I thought it would be most fitting to use the original recording equipment that the Beatles had used at Abbey Road Studios with the help from my father and from engineers Jeff Emmerich and Dave Harries. That equipment is now located at the prestigious British Grove Studios. On several occasions during the recording process, while sitting at the same equipment to record this book that the Beatles and my father had used for their vast catalog of songs, I felt I had become Paul. While this experience is a natural part of an actor's process, in this instance, with this subject matter, it felt uncanny. Is Paul dead? I leave that to you to decide. Meanwhile, in Paul's words, let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears. And that's the foreword by Gregory Paul Martin in the second edition of the Memoirs of Billy Shears. And here's a brief clip of Gregory doing the narration or voiceover for the book.
Stuart was the first martyr. Assuming Paul's identity, dreaming of him and feeling his presence, each reinforces the others. I stand for him and he for me. Part of each of us is in the other. Although I may say he died and I live, it is not entirely true. My own life as William was halted with Paul McCartney's fatal crash, yet he continued on through me. You might as well say Bill died and Paul lives. I'm not an impersonator in ordinary terms. Our exchange is mutual. Paul's spiritless remains mark the end of William's life now, to the extent that my living flesh embodies Paul's life. I am Paul. I am Billy. I have died. That is why I live as I do. Dreaming of him as myself, I dream particularly of that part of me that I miss growing up. It helps me understand who I am. Even before I left my life.
Back last year, I believe it was September of 2020, Gregory put a post up on his Facebook page, which I will show in a moment, where he is looking to distance himself from the work he did recording the audiobook. Now, I do know the person that triggered his response because this person wrote to me and explained what happened. I also want to make it clear I had no involvement in any of this, and I was unaware of the exchange until the email came in. When I used to be on Facebook, I did not belong to any Paul is Dead or Beatles group other than a private group I used to run, which I archived a year ago. I just don't find these groups and forums very interesting. And I wasn't even aware that Gregory had a Facebook page. So the way this came about, as it was explained to me, is Gregory put some posts up about McCartney and was referring to him as Paul, and then the person commented, "You mean Billy, right?" And then added, "Didn't you narrate the Memoirs audiobook?" Now I can see where this can be considered trolling, but I know this person and they are not mean-spirited, and if I had to guess, they were having some fun by poking a little. And the fact is, Gregory did narrate the audiobook and he is credited with the foreword in Memoirs. There is a certain level of interaction that goes with the territory when you engage a controversial topic as Gregory did when he approved the foreword and did the narration for the audiobook. I think his categorization of the person's comments being quote-unquote abusive is a little over the top, but then again, how people feel is subjective. What I can say is if you want to understand abusive comments, you should read what I get periodically from the haters. You would not believe how vile some people can truly be. Of course, Gregory's response made the rounds, and I was asked if I thought Gregory actually believes Billy is biological Paul, and my answer is no, I do not. In my opinion, I find that premise hard to believe. So with that backdrop, let me read Gregory's post which was forwarded to me, and then I will share my thoughts. I am knocking this Billy Shears BS on the head once and for all. Tonight, I got a disrespectful, abusive message from one of those dingbats dumb enough to believe the insane Paul is dead urban myth that Paul McCartney died before Sgt. Pepper and was replaced in the Beatles by some fictitious character named Billy Shears, and that the Big Mac attack we know and love today has been an imposter for over 53 years. This fresh lunacy is 100% caca. I spoke about it during the Q&A at the end of last Sunday's webinar on the astrology of the Beatles. I now realize that was not enough. To repeat, the reason I agreed to narrate you Harriet's bizarre Memoirs of Billy Shears was that I was having a blast impersonating Macca on the internet when he reached out to me offering me a very decent fee to narrate his book. I enjoy narration and obviously know the subject like the back of my hand. I had no clue until I was half into the 18 hours of recording how loony the book was. By that time, I was knee-deep into the project with a contract between us we had both signed. What else was I going to do except finish the daft job? I particularly regret setting up sessions for myself to record the text at Mark Knopfler's British Grove Studios in London. The manager is an old colleague of my father's. When he realized the preposterous nature of the book I was recording, he looked at me like I had a screw loose, like I was a wingnut who had just got out of the loony bin. And I don't blame him. Case closed. Now, we obviously have two diametrically opposing positions from Gregory. I personally find it very hard to believe that he did not know the full extent of what he signed up for when he agreed to narrate the book. Memoirs is still an underground book, meaning it is clearly not a mainstream read. So we have to ask ourselves, how is it that Tom, who is the author/encoder of a book which has limited mass exposure, since no book on the Paul is dead topic is on any bestseller list, how is it that Tom was able to 1. Connect with Gregory, who was a celebrity, and 2. Negotiate a deal to have Gregory narrate memoirs? This would be like me trying to contact him to come on my show and do an interview about his experiences regarding the Beatles and his father. The odds of that happening are extremely low. I might receive a polite form letter telling me no thanks, but getting as far as signing a contract is a pretty impressive play on Tom's part. And attorneys must have been involved to make sure the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, especially as it pertains to protecting the interests of Gregory. So what I'm saying is there had to be a discovery and negotiation process that took place before closing on the deal. It's hard to imagine he would not have known the specifics of what the book was about, including the details of the content, which would include the darker chapters contained within memoirs. Chapters with titles like Masonic Checkmate, Stone to Hell, More Satanic Murders, and Paulism beg for explanation. If it were me, I would have asked, okay, is there something in these chapters I need to know about? And to say, it wasn't until 18 hours into the recording that he figured out what the book was about seems to be a bit of a stretch, but that's just me. So the question I asked myself was, is there more to this story regarding the about face? On one hand, Gregory presents a glowing foreword for the book as well as agreeing to do the audiobook narration, and then he's distancing himself with the Facebook post. If I go at this from my own experiences on this topic, I can tell you that this research is highly controversial and can be extremely toxic. The level of hate that comes your way if you discuss or present the Beatles in a way that conflicts with the official narrative is beyond most people's comprehension. It gets very ugly very fast. The Beatles are a religion to millions upon millions of people. I get attacked by people within the Paul is Dead community because I dare to present a narrative that does not align and conflicts with the beliefs and dogma of ideologues. So if this kind of toxic behavior plays out within the Paul is Dead community, imagine a reaction from people who have no clue about the conspiracy and then find out George Martin's son wrote or approved the foreword of a book that unravels the Beatles' official story. And to top it off, he also did the voiceover for the audiobook. So perhaps Gregory experienced unanticipated blowback and it started to get uncomfortable. In other words, he found himself in a position where he was confronted with questions about his role in Memoirs, a book that questions the very core of so many people's belief that the Beatles were gods. And of course, an argument can be made that he should have expected at least some level of negative press, but trust me, Having been in this space for 5 years now, when you first get into this topic, there's no way of knowing the magnitude of the vitriol that ensues. Being thought of as a Paul is dead conspiracy theorist doesn't help in the public relations department, especially when your father is George Martin, who is often referred to as the fifth Beatle. And again, these are just my thoughts on possibilities. I could be completely wrong, and maybe there are very different reasons for what happened. For example, maybe this is all part of the Masonic concept of duality and opposing forces, as in, you say yes, I say no, you say stop, and I say go. Or maybe it's as simple as controversy sells books. And with that, I'll leave it there and let you decide. Okay, so let's move on now and take a closer look at the website, The Memoirs of Paul McCartney. Here's the homepage of The Memoirs of Paul McCartney. At first glance, it's straightforward and nothing flashy, but there is a ton of symbolism being shown, starting with the white print on the black background representing duality and the green and red color coding of the box sets, which I will explain in an upcoming slide. And there is, of course, numerology associated with the titles of the books. Let's read what the homepage has to say. I highlighted some of the wording, which I will get into in the next few slides. As I read, you should see that Billy is bringing both of his worlds together as he continues his disclosure process. The lyrics, 1956 to the present, and the Memoirs of Billy Shears reveal the pop icon from his own points of view, using mostly the same songs, but with their own focus. The lyrics, as put together by the gifted poet Paul Muldoon, presents the updated official story. The Memoirs of Billy Shears, as put together by the gifted poet and coder Thomas E.U. Harriott, offers the hidden and coded esoteric meaning. Together, as if one originated in Sir Paul's left brain and the other originated in his right brain, we discover shocking double meanings. You can now order these memoirs as box sets. The lyrics 1956 to the present will be released on November 2nd, 2021. The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which is already available on Amazon as a single volume, will be released as a special box set on October 12th, just 21 days ahead of the lyrics. That will give you 3 weeks to ingest the esoteric meanings of each song before returning to the traditional narrative. In the box sets, the 960 pages of the lyrics, 1956 to the present, are organized alphabetically by song title, A through K and then L through Z. Much of that reading consists of the lyrics themselves, followed by Sir Paul's recollections. In the Memoirs of Billy Shears, the 666 pages are divided with 33 chapters in each volume. The wording is important to focus on. Note the mainstream narrative about Billy is referred to as the official narrative and the traditional narrative. Why even use this wording unless there is another narrative at play? And we are clued in that the other narrative is esoteric, meaning there is a hidden story that will emerge upon studying both books. Now, before we continue with the box sets, let's understand a little about who Paul Muldoon is. The first thing we should know is his name in Pythagorean numerology reduces to 9, and the number of letters in Paul Muldoon equals 11. Coincidence? I don't think so, but you can decide for yourself. Muldoon is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He has received many awards for his work, and he is the recipient of honorary doctorates from 10 universities. So clearly, Mr. Muldoon is highly credentialed and in the club. Billy picks and chooses his team with great care, just as he did by selecting Tom to head up the Memoirs project and having Peter Jackson head up the new version of the Let It Be movie, which is now titled The Beatles Get Back and will be released on August 27th, 2021. Okay, so let's move back to the home page and look at the numbers. As we can see by looking at the slide, the home page is chock full of occult numbers. And as a point of reference, I am using Pythagorean numerology where applicable. The title of the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, equals 6. The last name of McCartney contains 9 letters. The title, The Lyrics, reduces to the number 11, which is a master number. The last 2 digits of 1956, or 5 plus 6, also sums to 11. And please note, Sometimes all 4 digits of a year are in the calculation, and other times it's the last 2 digits that are used. You will see it both ways, and it's very common. The lyrics box set is scheduled to release on November 2nd, 2021, which equals 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 1, summing to 9. As does the release date for the Memoirs box set on October 12th, 2021, which equals 1 plus 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 1, equaling 9. Memoirs will be released 21 days ahead of the lyrics. 2 plus 1 equals 3, and this points back to Billy's last album, McCartney 3. And an interesting footnote, when we add the numbers of each side of a die, we get 21. I did an entire presentation on decoding McCartney 3. If you have not watched the video, the link is in the description box below. Another 3 is represented by the 66 chapters in Memoirs. When we add 6 plus 6, we get 12, and then 1 plus 2 equals 3. 21 days is also 3 weeks. There are 7 days in each week, representing triple sevens or 777. 777 is the sum of the paths of the lightning flash of creation which travels along the tree of life. In occult circles, 777 is the house of Horus. 777 also represents spiritual consciousness in a physical human being, while 666 represents spiritual entities incarnated as beasts of the earth. And as we know, Memoirs is 666 pages, and 6 plus 6 plus 6 equals 18, and 1 plus 8 equals 9. The box set The Lyrics contains 960 pages, which is 9 plus 6 plus 0, which equals 15, and 1 plus 5 equals 6. In Memoirs, Billy tells us when he is playing Paul McCartney, he's all about the 9s, and when he is William or himself, he's about the 6s, which points back to Saturn and his Luciferian belief system. The number 9 is associated with transformation and change, which of course comes before the number 10, which represents completion. And now let's take a closer look at the lyrics box set. What appears to be simple artwork and presentation is actually loaded up with occult symbolism. Let's start with why Billy chose the color green for the cover. In Masonry, the color green is symbolic of the unchanging immortality of all that is divine and true. Masonry received this conception from the ancient Egyptians, where green represents the immortality of the soul, which is known to be divine. We can also see the box set has 2 volumes, denoted as A through K and L through Z. In numerology, AK reduces to 3, and LZ to 11. When we multiply 3 times 11, we get 33, representing the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The books, side by side, denotes the number 11, as well as representing the 2 pillars of Freemasonry, Joachim and Boaz. The pillars represent the spiritual development of man. One Masonic legend avers that philosopher Pythagoras discovered the pillars and together with Hermes used them to discover all of the secrets of geometry. We then see Billy's face is split in half. This is showing us he is comprised of 1/2 biological Paul and 1/2 himself as William, and we'll talk more about this in an upcoming slide. As I mentioned earlier, the name McCartney contains 9 letters, and the lyrics in Pythagorean numerology reduces to 11. And so we have 911 encoding as well as 11 itself, since 911, or 9 plus 1 plus 1, reduces to 11. And I should also mention that BioPaul's full name, James Paul McCartney, in Pythagorean numerology, is also 11. The full title of the box set, Paul McCartney The Lyrics, has numerology of 10. And as I stated before, the number 10 is the number of completion. This clue tells me that Billy is getting closer to wrapping things up. Now let's analyze the Memoirs box set. As would be expected, the Memoirs box set is brimming with occult numbers and symbolism. Let's start with the cover. The red cover represents the color of fire, and fire to the Egyptians was the symbol of regeneration and the purification of souls. Hence, in the Masonic system, red is the symbol of regeneration. The title of the box set, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, has numerology of 6. As with the lyrics box set, we again see the books side by side denoting the number 11, as well as the twin pillars of Freemasonry. and we see Billy's face is again divided in half. Volume 1 of the set contains 33 chapters, and the second book the remaining 33 chapters, totaling to 66 chapters. 33 can also represent 3 plus 3, which equals 6, as well as 3 times 3, equaling 9. The 66 chapters can be viewed as 6 plus 6, or 12, which takes us back to 3, and the number of dots on the die on the cover of Billy's McCartney 3 album. The Memoirs box set is especially focused on the numbers 3, 6, and 9, which are considered to be powerful numbers in the creation and existence of the universe. Now let's shift back to the image on the home page and see if there are any more occult clues. The image on the home page shows Billy in the middle between the two box sets. As we now know, the box sets are representative of the twin pillars of Freemasonry, Joachim and Boaz. Billy being positioned in the center with one box set to his right and the other to his left is depicting enlightenment. Between the pillars is the path to illumination, but first, we must learn our lessons by walking the path of duality, which is represented by the checkerboard floor. Also, note how each pillar contains the red and green colors. With the Masonic symbolism that Billy constantly presents, he is telling us that his work with the Beatles, as well as his solo career, is in support of human enlightenment. Although this philosophy has been in place for a very long time, going back to the Egyptian mysteries, the modern-era version emerged in the 1960s with the Human Potential movement, which became the Aquarian Conspiracy and then morphed into the concepts of the New Age movement. I explain these movements in greater detail in my presentation, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music? The link is in the description box below. It's important to note that there is a subset of memoirs called Beatles Enlightenment. From Tom's website, billyshears.com, we are told Beatles Enlightenment contains selections from the Memoirs of Billy Shears that are too philosophical or spiritually esoteric for the general readership of Billy's back. If you enjoy books by illuminaries such as Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, Ram Dass, or Marianne Williamson, you will love reading some of their favorite concepts behind Beatles songs. Now, I'm not saying what Billy is involved in or what he supports or believes is good or bad. That is something that is up to each of us to decide. I'm simply presenting my research and interpretation of the meaning behind the symbolism. Symbolism he has been presenting for almost 60 years. Now let's take a look back 40 years and see if Billy was giving us similar clues. At first glance, Billy's McCartney 2 album from 1980 appears to be unassuming. However, as with all of his work, there is far more to see than meets the eye. To the left, I have the graphic from the previous slide as reference. To the right, we see Billy's McCartney 2 album cover along with some additional images and call-outs to explain what is going on. The album cover by itself shows Billy between two shadows. He is again telling us he is one part Paul and one part William. Therefore, in a sense, he is split in two, as depicted by each volume of the two box sets. The shadows also denote the twin pillars of Masonry, with Billy in the center representing illumination. One pillar is Paul and the other is Billy, with the character of Paul McCartney representing the path to enlightenment. This spiritual concept is referred to as Paulism in the Memoirs of Billy Shears. Paulism is the concept where biological Paul is a graven Christ figure who died and was resurrected through Billy. People who idolize the Beatles and Billy as Paul McCartney are unknowingly adherents to the religion of Paulism. To the occultist, harnessing human consciousness and energy to manifest a desired outcome does not require willing participation. It only requires your focus and attention. That focus and attention comes in the form of worshiping or idolizing the Beatles by playing their songs, going to concerts, watching documentaries, reading books, buying merchandise, and believing the official or traditional Beatles story, which is mostly fiction. Paulism is a Luciferian cult. And as a side note, if you consider yourself a Paul is Dead researcher or follower, but believe the Beatles started organically and were prolific songwriting geniuses before being commandeered by evil forces, you are unwittingly in the Church of Paulism as well, as a result of continued worship, idolizing, or believing in, at least in part, to the official Beatles story. Now going back to the image on the right, we again see the 9 letters of McCartney along with the Roman numeral for 2. However, 2 also represents the master number of 11. 1 plus 1 equals 2. And the Roman numeral is also symbolic of the zodiac sign of Gemini. Gemini represents the twins, and thus we are back to the 2 shadows on the album cover, which when combined represents Billy's character of Paul McCartney. I should also note that Bio Paul was born on June 18, 1942, and he was a Gemini. Last but not least, the release date of McCartney 2 was May 16, 1980, which reduces to 3, which of course can be representative of 6, 9, 21, and 777. Now let's swing back to the website and take a look at the other tabs for possible clues. Okay, so the next tab over from the home page is titled The Lyrics, and again the website is memoirsofpaul.com, and I will leave a link in the description box below. So let's take a look at what the website says and see if we could pick up on any clues. The Lyrics, created with the talents of the poet Paul Muldoon, is the official memoirs of Paul McCartney. It presents 154 songs traditionally credited to Paul McCartney with the Beatles, Wings, and through the long solo McCartney career. The Lyrics 1956 to the present is the standard memoirs of Paul McCartney, which naturally excludes the forbidden information. So the first thing that caught my attention is the number 154, which reduces down to the number 10, which is the number of completion. And if I had to guess, what this is representing is that Billy is wrapping things up. The other wording that caught my attention is 154 songs traditionally credited to Paul McCartney. It doesn't say 154 songs written by Paul McCartney. And that's a big distinction, folks. Okay, so let's move down. These 154 songs, arranged alphabetically, are presented as if all were written by the same individual. Spanning 2 volumes, these commentaries give Sir Paul's ideas of how the songs were written, including some details of Paul's life and some discussion about the individuals who inspired some of those songs. So this one is just filled with clues. The 154 songs arranged alphabetically are presented as if all were written by the same individual. And what this is telling us is they were not written by the same individual. And then this paragraph goes on to say, these commentaries give Sir Paul's ideas of how the songs were written. Well, why are they his ideas? If Paul McCartney wrote these songs, then he should know exactly how these songs were written. Next paragraph. Sharing such ideas, ranging from the historical to the whimsical, strengthens and expands the traditional conservative narrative of how these songs came to be. While discussing some of his literary influences, such as William Shakespeare and Lewis Carroll, he gives details that are not in the Memoirs of Billy Shears when referring to the same individuals. And again, we see this very odd wording, traditional, conservative, narrative, which alludes to the fact that the narrative is neither traditional nor conservative. Handwritten texts, paintings, and carefully selected photographs from McCartney's personal archives further instill the idea of continuity from the early Paul to Sir Paul today. However cropped, morphed, or otherwise modified to create a seamless transition from the original Paul to the present knighted gentleman in that position, these artifacts are the new standard for the official narrative. So, again, we have some very, very interesting wording here. So, we're being told that we have carefully selected photographs from McCartney's personal archives that will further instill the idea of continuity from the early Paul to Sir Paul today. And what this is telling me is that there is a break in continuity, meaning we have biological Paul and we have Billy. And then the paragraph goes on to tell us that photographs and images have been cropped, morphed, and modified. This is something that I have been telling my audience from the very beginning, that they have been doctoring photographs and images from the start. And then it tells us this was done to create a seamless transition from the original Paul to the present knighted gentleman in that position. It can't be any more clear than that, folks. The original Paul to the present knighted gentleman in that position. The lyrics, spanning 64 years, 6 plus 4 is 10, so we have the number of completion again, shall be Paul's definitive literary and visual record. It is the new authority on what current and future generations are to believe about Paul McCartney. With the help of these official memoirs of Paul McCartney, the charming lad from Liverpool will be long remembered as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. And if we take a look at the right side of the website, we have some images. Of course, here's the box set of the lyrics. And then we have this image of the lads. This appears to be a hybrid Paul McCartney. You can take a look at the chin, how it is elongated, as well as the entire picture being enhanced. We also have a version of John Lennon without the pinched, pointy nose. The next image is one that I believe I put up on my community tab on my Paul is Dead channel, and we could see that we have the exact same backdrop, and we have the exact same suits, ties, fingers. The only thing different is the heads. So here's biological Paul, and here is Billy. So that obviously was done to point out that there are two people, at least two people, playing the role. What I've always noticed about this image is the shininess of Billy's face, and it is Billy. You can take a look at the nose. That's his nose. And I believe the smoothness and the shininess is because of latex. That's been my take on that image. And down below we have another picture of the lads, and this does appear to be biological Paul. One of the facial features that distinguishes biological Paul from Billy is the ears. Paul had attached earlobes, and his ears stuck out, and Billy's ears are unattached, and his ears sit closer to his head. Okay, so with that, let's move to the next tab now, which is titled Billy Shears. Okay, so this tab starts with the Memoirs of Billy Shears is the tell-all memoirs of Paul McCartney. It was created with the talents of poet and coder Thomas E.U. Harriott and has a foreword by Gregory Paul Martin, the son of fifth Beatle George Martin. So this is interesting because earlier in the presentation, I took you through the controversy involving Gregory, and here we have the website openly promoting the fact that Gregory wrote the foreword to the Memoirs of Billy Shears. The website goes on to say, the Memoirs of Billy Shears is packed with historically significant disclosure about the Beatles and about the elites who placed the band on the world stage to launch their global agendas. Many of these historical facts had been hidden from the 60s until this book. Crafted with poetic brilliance, while conveying the historical message from Sir Paul's point of view, the book utilizes multiple methods, all with layered meaning, that pulls you in deeper with each reading. With all that going on, and with the book being the first to have word stacking and acrostical messages on every page of the narrative, it can be overwhelming. These memoirs of Paul McCartney are far less conservative than the traditional story. The Memoirs of Billy Shears is more creative, historically detailed, and shockingly revealing. It is much too much to take in all at once. The Memoirs has a built-in sequel. On your first readings, we highly recommend that you ignore all of the above distractions and just focus on the story and song meanings, especially on the meanings that are not permitted in the official memoirs. That's going back to the lyrics. We especially urge you to ignore the acrostical code, word stacking, and footnotes on your first time through. After you have a good handle on the entire narrative, read it again with the word stacking and the acrostic. Finally, but not before your third reading, include the footnotes. That intended reading method changes the book so dramatically, taking you down many rabbit holes that eventually all connect. You really will feel as if you are reading a sequel. The book transforms itself as it initiates the reader. So there's a lot of information here, much of which I have been presenting and breaking down over the last, it's almost 5 years now. But we do get a very interesting phrase here. On your first readings, we highly recommend that you ignore all of the above distractions. We. Who's we? If it were just Tom, he would say, on your first readings, I highly recommend that you ignore all of the above distractions. Okay. And again, we have some images on the right-hand side, making some comparisons. And these are very, very obvious. And here Tom is showing some of the encoding. So here's the word stacking. I want you to know me. Paul McCartney is not who I am. Paul died in 1966. I am William. Now you can call me Billy Shears. The acrostic is a vertical code. And there is a separate book that just calls out the acrostic code. So you don't have to sit there with a pencil and a piece of paper and write it all out. Okay, so let's go to the last tab now. And that's titled Free Audio. And it starts by saying, honoring the legacy of fifth Beatle Sir George Martin, his son Gregory Paul Martin recorded the unofficial tell-all memoirs of Paul McCartney, the Memoirs of Billy Shears. To record this historically significant book, Gregory used the recording equipment that his father, George Martin, had used with the Beatles at Abbey Road Studios. That equipment is now located at the prestigious British Grove Studios. While recording the memoirs, sitting at that original equipment that the Beatles had used to record their vast catalog of songs, Gregory felt on several occasions that he himself had actually become Paul. It felt as though Paul were telling the whole story through him. Considering the subject matter, Gregory said that it felt uncanny. So again, this is very interesting, right? Going back to the controversy and Gregory distancing himself from the book with the Facebook post. And here we have a tab which is promoting his participation. So maybe what I said earlier, that controversy sells books, was exactly what was going on. Okay? So I'm going to conclude with my final thoughts. It should be very obvious now to anyone with a clear and open mind that Billy is continuing his disclosure process. As many of you know, I was a die-hard Beatle fanatic, and then all of that changed when I read the original version of Memoirs and started to investigate the claims made in the book. And as time went on, and after decoding the layers within Memoirs, it became obvious to me the book was indeed telling the truth, both about the replacement of Paul McCartney and the true nature of what the Beatles really were, a band manufactured by Tavistock with the objective to social engineer our culture and society in order to usher in a one-world governance. More and more people are waking up to the realization that the Beatles, like the rest of reality, were and are a massive deception. The truth is, the lads were never organic and they were controlled from the very beginning. The notion of 4 working-class scousers from Liverpool who were a bar and club band and then discovered by a small record store owner who got them signed to a major recording contract with EMI under the tutelage of George Martin, which then led to unprecedented fame and fortune, is fiction. It's a Cinderella story that people love to believe in, but it's simply not true. There was no organic, and they did not write all their own music. As I undertook this journey, I was fascinated by the lines drawn within the Paul is Dead circles, where it's encouraged to examine and discuss the replacement of biological Paul while trashing Billy, but questioning the Beatle narrative prior to Billy's arrival is off limits. That piece of the story must stay together. I always found this odd, and it actually begs you to look deeper into this part of Beatle history. Several months back, I was sent an email with a post from a Paul is Dead Facebook group accusing me of inflicting unimaginable damage to Paul's legacy. I had to chuckle. Another person trapped in the illusion and an unknowing adherent to the cult of Paulism. My take is, the truth is the truth, and an honest researcher follows the clues. Otherwise, one becomes a partisan ideologue with dogmatic beliefs, or worse, an agenda. The Beatles' psychological operation is far more than the replacement of biological Paul. It is a tale of how the pyramid of power operates, and Memoirs, if nothing else, pulls the curtain back, allowing us to get a glimpse of the great Oz. As I look back over the past 5 years, I feel very good about what I have presented to my audience, and I do believe, in the end, when the smoke settles, history will prove me far more right than wrong when full disclosure finally emerges. And last but not least, I want to reiterate that I have no affinity to either Paul or Billy. In fact, all of the luster that I used to see around the Beatles is gone. Yes, I can still appreciate the talents of the songwriting regardless of who actually composed the songs, but the idolizing and worship is no longer a part of my life. And I have to say, it's very liberating. Knowing the truth is far better than living the lie. Thanks for listening.